Good day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wayne's World of Science and Technology. Yes, I've got the stupid war hat on again. No matter what I do, I can't seem to get away from the war. These are a bunch of unscripted comments that I am making in regards to things that I have seen online. In other words, how should I put it? This is a lot of stuff that's been really bugging me. Some of it has gotten to the point where I, quite frankly, have been furious because it's like you wonder whether or not these people are trying to deliberately be silly. It just doesn't make sense, a lot of what they're saying. And so, anyway, let's start off. Just a second, I gotta find it. Here we next one. Nope, that's not the one I wanted. Sorry, I had to open about 5 million tabs to figure out which one I needed. Okay. Basically, there was a guy claiming back in January that Ukraine was going to start an offensive in March. I pointed out at the time that March is mud season in Ukraine. I mean, let's face it, Ukraine is a warm country. And yeah, I know a lot of people are probably going to say, what? But seriously, it is. Compared to where I live, it's a warm country. So, I mean, you don't want to move in Ukrainian mud. We saw what happened last year. Based on the weather, if Ukraine had been going to start an offensive, it would have been in January. But obviously they didn't. And it appears Russia actually did, or at least tried to. That's one of those things that people are still debating whether or not what they did was an offensive or whether or not it was a joke. But that's beside the point. Then there's been all these comments about how Russia was going to take Ukraine in 3 days. On the first day of the war, I said that Russia had already lost just by invading. But, okay. Let me put it this way. First Chechen War, Georgian War, Second Chechen War. What do those have in common? Simple. Russia had a hard time handling far smaller countries than Ukraine. What makes everyone think that if they had a hard time handling Chechnya, where basically they ended up fighting for nearly 20 years, that they could handle Ukraine? Ukraine's way bigger with a lot more people. I mean, like we're talking, I think it's 20 some odd times the population. It's just not conceivable. And, you know, people have been commenting, let's see, this piece of equipment's a death trap. This piece of equipment's a death trap. Why are we sending Bradleys to Ukraine? They're going to be death traps. The M1 Abrams will be a death trap. Well, for God's sakes, the current tanks and equipment that Ukraine is using are already proving to be death traps, both for them and the Russians. It's not going to make any difference. The only difference is that Ukraine will have the extra equipment which will enable them to move. And, okay, so then there's another issue. Everybody's been screaming about JDAMs and how big they are and how important they are. Oh, don't get me wrong, they are important. The point is that a lot of other people have been screaming, oh yeah, but Ukraine can't use them, they don't have an air force. You don't need an air force to use a JDAM. You just need a means of getting it into an air. Ukraine has a very strong rocket industry. They can build rocket boosters to get the JDAMs up. Once they're up there, the GPS guidance kicks in. Somebody was commenting that Russian tank production was going to basically triple within months. And I basically said something along the lines of how. You know, they couldn't explain it. And basically, it's during World War II, Russia built a lot of tanks, yes. They built those tanks using imported steel, a lot of which came from the United States. Not saying all of it, or even a majority of it, but a big chunk did. They didn't build trucks because the United States shipped Studebakers over. That makes a difference. And the next thing is that the T-34s that were used during World War II were really, really primitive devices. And when I say primitive, I'm not knocking the T-34 as a tank. The Sherman was just as bad as were most of the German tanks. I mean, they just didn't have the bells and whistles that today's tanks have that make them so much more effective. You put a couple hundred T-34s up against two or three modern T-72s, and the T-34s are going to die fast. And the T-72s probably aren't going to get a scratch. There's that difference in effectiveness. It's harder to make new equipment. The equipment is so much more complex and requires so many more inputs that scaling up things, as we've noticed with U.S. production, is difficult. You can't do it fast. And, the idea that Russia would all of a sudden double tank production, well, okay, yeah, they could put a second shift on, but what are they going to do with the second shift? Then they've got to get the materials to supply the second shift. They've got to train the second shift. They've got to hope that the machinery holds up. And, if you double your throughput, you're going to double your wear and tear on your machinery at a minimum. If you don't keep your maintenance up, the machinery dies, at which point production goes to hell. It's not an easy thing to scale up production fast. And the idea that Russia could suddenly scale up and start pumping out hundreds and hundreds of tanks a month is just ludicrous. Anybody who says that they can is living in dreamland. And if they try and tell you that they can prove it, get them to show you the numbers. It'll be really interesting to see what they are. And yeah, show them to me, because I'd love to tear them apart. And, one of the points that comes up is that, Russia's upping military production. Well, Ukraine's upping military production as well. And Ukraine has a lot easier time drawing in on external sources. If they need components from the West, they can get them. Russia can't. This makes a huge difference. Setting up supply chains is a big deal. Building equipment is a big deal. You can't use an unskilled workforce on today's equipment. You require real skills, and building supply chains takes a long time. Building skills takes a long time. You need more machine tools if you want to build more equipment. Where do you source them? Do you have the suppliers have them in stock? Probably not. They've got to build them. How long is it going to take them? There's so many factors that play into it. You just don't know how hard it is to do this sort of thing. And sanctions are making this far more difficult because a lot of machine tools that Russia uses are Western sourced. They can't buy them anymore, or at least not easily. See my bit on how the real meaning of sanctions is to create Han Solos. And, it's said Ukraine's upping production, so's Russia. I think Ukraine is probably winning on this because they don't face the same constraints. They may not have the population, but the population is more centralized. Russia's is spread over a far larger area, which makes it far harder to bring people together to get things done. Ukraine went to a war economy in March. Russia only recently did so. This means Ukraine is far into the build cycle on a lot of equipment. The power issues that Russia caused by trying to knock out the electrical grid came late enough that they wouldn't have interfered with the slack in the system. In other words, components that Ukraine was able to build up and start stockpiling because they weren't immediately using it. Ukraine's been prioritizing power to the military and the mill-industrial complex, both through localized power outages and allocating a certain large proportion of donated generators to factories. Factories are being protected by air defense, as are power systems. Russia can damage Ukrainian production, but they can't stop it. Ukraine can damage Russian production. They can toss some drones over the border. They can't stop it. That is not going to be how this war ends. This war is going to end on the battlefield with one side or the other gaining a victory. And it's just not going to happen. You know, nothing is going to happen quick. Now, there have been a bunch of new weapons that have shown up, but every single one of them was in development pre-war. There's nothing new there, except for the increased use of kamikaze drones. And the fact that Ukraine has managed to reduce the prices to a point that, well, it's just incredible. It should be terrifying every military out there. Excuse me, my nose is itching. And there was the big noise about the Battle of Soledar. I pointed out many times that Soledar and Bakhmut aren't strategically important. The reason they aren't strategically important is because you can't go anywhere from them. They're important from the point of view that Soledar controls some mines and Bakhmut controls a bunch of roads, but it's really difficult to go anywhere from them because the hills behind them. You'd basically be fighting your way uphill. And Ukraine has heavily fortified those hills. And somebody said, why does Ukraine continue defending it if it's not strategically important? It's like, well, hey, it's their land. What do you want them to do? Back up all the way to the Polish border? Because something is strategically important, just keep backing up. I mean, it doesn't make sense, folks. Of course Ukraine's going to fight for their land. Now, I have no idea what they're going to do about it. It's beyond me. I'm not the sort of guy who... I'm not a combat specialist. I just happen to know a fair bit about production and how... it just doesn't work out that way. Anyways, they keep on announcing new weapons that are effectively modifications of existing weapons on both sides. You know, a lot of stuff is not new. And, now, of course, there's the massive Russian military expansion. Exactly where they're going to get the equipment for everybody that they bring into the military is really a really good question. And, as I pointed out a couple times, capitalism doesn't work for militaries. Socialism doesn't work either. Both have been shown to be disasters in planning. They're unsuitable for use for military work. What does work? God knows. I have no idea. I know that in the past, certain countries have maintained country-owned facilities, but I'm not necessarily sure that that's the best answer. That's something that economists and military thinkers are going to have to come up with. It's beyond my pay grade. Then there's the fun bit about everybody's been freaking out over the fact that, oh my God, the Ukrainians allow gay people into the military. I say everybody over in Russia. And a lot of really right-wing religious types. one of the things they pointed out is that gender dysphoria is not a mental health condition. The mind altering hormones are basically a case of it's hormones. I mean, like it's the stuff that you got in your body all the time. The only difference is a slight variation in levels between male and female. And I mean, like it's not a big deal. Let's see now. Everybody's trying to figure out what's going to happen next in Ukraine. Um, General thought is that Russia's going to continue to fight, and yeah, I think they're going to continue to fight until the last man, or literally. But as far as Ukraine is planning, my personal guess is they're aiming for Crimea. They cut off Crimea. It's assuming they can get a force to the base of Crimea, and they're able to cover the Azov Sea and almost all the Black Sea with harpoons. All of a sudden, the Russian Black Sea Fleet becomes an endangered species. Never mind the fact that Crimea is literally indefensible. It's if you have long range weapons, you can just sit there and bounce, fire at the Russian positions on Crimea, and they can't reinforce them. It's just one of those things. Because of the damage to the Crimean Bridge and the fact that it can be damaged again, yeah, it's a mess. Anyway, it's one of those things that never mind. This is unscripted, so you're getting me mumbling a little bit more than usual. I will try and control it. Then there's a beautiful one. One particular channel does a thing called Lessons in Insanity. You can find that by just searching for that. And the guy swears up and down that Greta Thunberg had a brain scan. And whenever the word green is mentioned, she has an orgasm. The brain scan showed that. Didn't provide any link to the proof because there is no proof. He invented it. Or he's been hanging around on one of those really wacko conspiracy sites for too much of his time. And well, anyway, we also run into a couple of cultural issues that I don't think people have really taken into account. Authoritarian regimes of any sort tend to limit information flow. They have to. Because you basically got one person making decisions and a small group around him implementing the decisions. It's not something you can just hand off. You can't trust people. You're an authoritarian. So what do? You have this, or let's see, trying to explain myself. So you end up in a situation where if you don't handle things really, really carefully, you can end up getting blocked from information. There's a story going the rounds, and I'm not sure how accurate it is. Well, there was big power blackouts in China last year. The story is that President Xi of China found out about them from President Biden of the United States. If that's true, that shows a total lack of communication between the people on the ground in China and the top end. And that leads to problems. It means people on top have no idea what's going on. This is part of why Russia invaded Ukraine. So many lies had gone up the chain of command. They thought they had a stronger military than they did. I'd looked at the numbers and I was pretty certain that their military was junk, but, well, What could I prove, right? And now they've gotten in a war and they've proven that their military pretty well is junk. It's not even the second, well, it is the second strongest army in Ukraine, I guess, because you can't really count Wagner as an army, but oh, anyway, authoritarians have to believe they're powerful. If they don't have that belief, they've got nothing, and as a result, they tend to get really, really, really bad information. Really bad information and make bad mistakes. Not actually, because the biggest thing I'm concerned about with Taiwan is that Z might not realize how badly attacking Taiwan would backfire. You could, and I'm serious, you could knock China back into the worst famine you could think of within 6 months to a year just by putting some ships in the Indian Ocean. Some more ships and interrupting fuel supplies to China. So it's interesting. I mean, like, I really have no idea. I hope that he well, I hope that Z is getting the information. I really do, because if he does make that attack, it would be so damn stupid. But anyway. And there's also predictions there's going to be a Russian summer offensive. I don't think so. I think there's going to be a spring Ukraine offensive, late spring, and that there's a very good chance there may not be any Russian troops in Ukraine by the end of the summer. So we'll find out. It's going to be interesting. Unfortunately, interesting means a lot of dead people. And I really, really, really don't want to see a lot of more dead people. I mean, we don't need that. Anyways, I'm cutting it here because my voice is starting to go, and you've probably had enough of me meandering. Quite frankly, the sheer illogic that is coming from a lot of commentators. You know, you got people like Scott Ritter who basically doesn't seem to have a clue. What was that guy's name? Oh, I wish I knew his. I can't remember his name right now. He's some guy doing a podcast claimed he was living in Ukraine. He's a big Ukrainian fan, but Russia's going to win, and it's like, okay, guy. And second he hears about Nord Stream, he immediately jumps to the conclusion it's Americans. Could have been. We don't know. For that matter, could have been bloody Exxon doing it. Exxon's got the capabilities. Oh, so I mean, like, it's just totally, totally ridiculous. But anyway, I'm, as I said, enough for now. Good evening, folks. I hope you found this useful. I don't know if it was or not, but hey. And later today, I'm going to try and cut a video on anthropology, which is what I really want to be covering. Have a nice day, folks. Bye-bye.